Hey, I'm Aubriana, and this is a conversation series with builders, leaders, and people shaping and studying the work of change across media, technology, and AI. We talk about what's really happening beyond the headlines, what's real, what's messy, and how people are thinking about transformation that actually makes a difference. Welcome to Agents of Change, Human in the Loop. Hey everybody, today I'm joined by Rex Briggs, Chief AI Officer at Claritas. Rex has been thinking about algorithms and AI and marketing productivity long before this current wave of hype happened. So I would say in the mid 90s at Wired and HotWired, he was pioneering log file analytics, post-click attribution modeling, behavior targeting, and even neural networks to predict lifetime value at a time when most of the industry was still figuring out the web. Later, he founded Marketing Evolution, helped write global brands measure and optimize marketing ROI for nearly 2 decades. He's author of What Sticks and most recently the AI Conundrum, published by MIT Press, which explores both the strengths and limitations of AI. And more than a decade ago, in a TEDx talk, I was checking this out. Rex, you predicted a shift from knowledge workers to insight workers, where knowledge proactively seeks you at the moment of decision, and that idea feels especially relevant today. And now, as Chief AI Officer at Claritas, you're helping bring that long-held vision into enterprise reality. So Rex, welcome to Agents of Change.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you so much for for noticing the earlier work and its connection to today. It does feel like we're finally in the moment. Back a decade ago with that TED Talk, we were having to connect together systems with collaborative filtering and building corpuses of data and best practices. And it was possible, but man, it's so much easier now with the large language models and the advances that we've seen there. It's an exciting time.
It is exciting. It was fun to see those you have been building at the edge of transformation since the early web. And that, I wanted to kind of go back and say, why or how does this AI moment feel different maybe from previous waves of innovation? And does it to you?
Yeah, there's certainly parts of the moment that rhyme with the past but are different. I think the adoption curve isn't going to be the technology, it's going to be people. That was very similar to the internet adoption. Microsoft, those might have been the three first studies. And then a year later, we did in 1997 13 different studies with the IAB, and that became the basis of our knowledge set that said, hey, online advertising works. But
Mhm.
why did it take a decade for the industry to catch up with that knowledge and fully adopt and lean in and scale? And some of it had to do with, okay, you know it works, but how do you know it works better than what I'm already doing? And that took us 3 years to figure out how to do that research. That became the basis of attribution analysis. Some of my early work there advanced that forward. I think what's different about AI today is that we still have those hurdles that we have to go through. We know that AI personalization works far better. We've now done, I think we're up to around 20 different studies that are public on every industry that we've done with the Marketing and Media Alliance, or MMA Global, the trade group. And then Claritas has done, 2 or 3 times that many privately. I've tested different technologies like Clinch and Innovid and Flash Talkie and found that they did not work nearly as effective as the Claritas technology. That's kind of why I decided to become the chief AI officer there. Yet we see the adoption relatively slow on something that we know could affect, 20, 25% of your media today. So the interesting part, I think, that's similar and different. The different part is the technology is far more powerful today.
Mhm.
It's moving at a faster rate. And my estimate early on when I was co-authoring the AI Conundrum with my son Caleb was that this was an order of magnitude bigger, 10 times bigger than what we lived through with the internet. But what's the same is you still have people who have a degree of learning that they have to go through to be able to adopt the tools, and a degree of fear. And I'd say the fear is higher today than it was during the internet wave, though, the fear is sort of ever present when it comes to humans needing to change. That's sort of a given. But I think it's stronger today and maybe for better reasons. And maybe, I know you've thought a lot about where the human is in the loop and where that fits in, but I think that this could be a very dramatic shift that we'll see today.
Well, how do you think that's going to shift perhaps like accountability, the way that we think about accountability when it comes to that? But how do you think this is going to change that?
Yeah, accountability. So if you go back to first principles and say, why do we advertise? Why do we market? I think trade has been one of the best inventions of humankind in the last 10,000 years. For many, many years, people would just go over and hit the other person over the head with a club and steal their stuff. That's a lot of our history. So I like the fact that we have trade and we figure out, how do I create value? How do I exchange that value with you? And marketing was an extension of that. You can trace it all the way back. There's ads that you can find protected in the ash of Pompeii, talking about so and so's fish sauce is the one you want. I mean, that the idea of your brand and creating something that had consistency and value and could be durable so that other people would want to buy it. And of course, you need to communicate that to other people to let them know about you exist and to try your brand. That stays as a truism. But what does that look like when you send your agent out to do the homework for you to decide what
Mhm.
you should buy? What does that look like when the agent actually makes that purchase for you? How do you go about marketing to an agent? So I think that there's one dimension that in terms of accountability, which is we are going to have to change our measurement systems to expand to be able to link back the identity of the agent back to the person and to think about how that influence works. And what are you trying to maximize? The gaming system of search engines is a good prelude to what we'll probably see with Gen AI optimization. The other side is internally, what's the accountability? You
Mhm.
work in an organization, you're part of your creating value is developing advertisements or marketing campaigns. And the value you're creating is that you can efficiently communicate with people and get them to want to buy your product and hopefully shift share from the competitor to you. But again, what happens when more and more of your work is done by an AI algorithm?
Mhm.
What does alignment look like and what is accountability? Into alignment and accountability, the alignment part needs to be more than just the short-term ROI. Many people get ROI wrong, and it is a presentation I've given many times over the last 30 years, but there is what's called a short-term ROI trap. If you were to tell me right now, hey, I've got this podcast, it's new, I want lots of people to know about it. How should I go about marketing that? How should I go about advertising that? You have a very interesting situation because you're talking to many people who already are in your network and know you. They're going to be the easiest and fastest to convert. But if you only talk to that group, then how do you expand as large as you want to? And there's two mechanisms for which you're going to expand. Either one is a pass along. That pass along is powerful. And then the other dimension is if you decide to advertise and get to new people that you don't know yet.
Mhm.
And that part for the alignment, you're going to need to balance the short term versus the long term. Short term, you always get the highest return from your existing customers or your existing network. But if you only talk to your existing network, then you never expand and grow at the rate that you want to grow. But the ROI is going to cost you 5 to 10 times more to get someone who hasn't heard of you before to connect and listen to your podcast compared to getting someone who already knows you to listen to your podcast. So the short-term trap is this thing where marketers say, I want the highest ROI, and then they lose sight of the fact that you have to have a balance of high ROI people that already know you and lower ROI people that you need to connect with and introduce, and that takes more time and more money. So I think the alignment part, we have to be more than just an ROI algorithm. It has to be tied into a short-term, long-term understanding
Yeah.
and objective. And then if we do that right, then the accountability is relatively straightforward, which is, yes, we have to figure out how to count agents and measure their conversion rates and connect them back to people and figure out the ID graph. We've got a lot of work to do there, but we should be able to then figure out what's the value in the short and long term.
So, something I was thinking about as you were talking about where you want to share this and in which networks, I think about like the black box, right? Dependency that there is right now. And there's a lot of limitations, there's a lot of challenges with transparency. Where do you feel like we are? What's the risk of that right now?
Yeah, well, there's two layers to the black box. One is AI itself works in multidimensional space. And even if you do look at all the weights in like a deep neural network, our ability to understand that, our brains just sort of tap out at maybe 3 to 5 dimensions. When you get into the millions or billions, most advertising analysis is going to happen still, in the dozens or few hundreds. But so I'm an empiricist in approaching it, which is I might not be able to understand every single weight in the model, but I can run a series of experiments, and those experiments will yield to me the insights of what's driving what and how it's working. And that's a lot of how we built the Claritas AI personalization. You can run a campaign, you can see the results, and then you can connect it back to the Claritas ID graph and see what kinds of people were converting or not. Good case example is Lyric, the Cadillac Lyric. It's an EV higher end vehicle. And the campaigns that were running had different ads. One of them showed the vehicle with an EV charger on the outside exterior view. Another one showed the vehicle and you could use a 3D thing to move around. And another one showed the interior. There were different messages like view inventory or talking about the range or luxury vehicle of the year. The AI mixed and matched those and delivered a significant increase, 166% increase when the AI could match whether that chic view is for you and maybe the range one was for me, performed better. What was really fascinating is we connected that with Gen AI and we hit the AI, we took the data, we hit it against the Claritas ID graph, and we could see that certain segments of people that were in general Cadillac prospects were more likely to convert than others. We ranked them by the high index versus low index. The AI then analyzed and figured out that the low index people were different from the high index in that the high index people tended to be young urban professionals that were into technology, they're into their careers, professional networkers, etc. But the people that weren't converting as well were sort of their parents. They were the older empty nesters that were very affluent, definitely could buy a Cadillac, but they valued safety, luxury. And it was, again, this Prism data from Claritas, the segmentation, is what gave us this hydrated insight and information. And then the AI created sample ads or storyboards of what it thought would appeal to those empty nesters. And Claritas, the Cadillac team actually gets credit for this one. In a week, they had new ads live that showed these incredibly, beautiful quilted leather seats with the speakers in the headrests and a new message about the fact that Cadillac Lyric had over 20 standard safety and driver assist features. What we saw was that 166% increase, which was already pretty impressive. That went up to over 400%. So I think that this feedback loop that we're seeing in the black boxes, you don't have to understand all the weights and all the values as long as you have a corpus of data and a feedback loop and you can test things and you can learn to see whether you can move the needle. And we saw over 20% increase in those empty nests, the segments like upper crust and so forth. So really, I would say treat the black box as a opportunity for experimentation and create a feedback loop to learn what it's doing and how you push it and what it does when you try different things. The other part of the black box is we create a lot of complexity in measurement, which isn't truly black box, but it's poor disclosure, which is, I found as I looked closer at the current attribution solutions and ID graphs, that there's a lot of, I'll call it noise. It's not great quality all the time. And some of it's because people misunderstand how to use the tool properly. So most of the ID graphs are used for buying audiences. And when you buy an audience like luxury car intenders, you're totally fine having an expanded audience that's much larger than the people that convert. 200,000 units. The segment target might be 20 million people. So many of them are not ever going to convert for Lyric or any of the competitors, but it's better to draw the net a bit wider so you don't miss people who could be good prospects. That same technique, though, completely destroys accurate measurement because you get way too many false positives. And if you have a false positive in the control group or someone who is in the control group in the exposed group, it collapses the lift and you no longer know what's up or what's down. So I think that the part of the black box, I think, is poor disclosure and people not necessarily thinking through all the complexity of what's in the data and making sure that they have really good
Mhm.
tools and transparency and unit testing at each step to be able to see exactly what's happening as deep as they can look into it. I just think as an industry we need to do better with that. We can use
Yeah.
AI agents to help us keep an eye on stuff like that, but we ourselves have to understand how do these ID graph systems work, how do these measurement systems work so that we can be better consumers of them.
No, completely agree. That's very interesting. And I think that, as a whole, you think about Cadillac, GM, they have honed in on this problem for many, many years. And so they're probably far more advanced than several of their competitors or just other brands in the space, right? But I think there's starting to be an opportunity to level the playing field just a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about what breaks. We hear so much about the marketing fluff, like we're building these great AI tools as an industry. Everybody's trying to share all the exciting stuff they're doing, and we try to amplify it, right? That's what marketers do. And I think there's a core difference between using AI to optimize campaigns and then building AI as core enterprise infrastructure. So I wanted to think about two components and hear your perspective. One, what does that shift require culturally and technically? And then what's breaking when organizations are trying to scale AI right now? Like, what are you seeing? What
Yeah,
are they quietly failing?
yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful point. What breaks first and foremost is our org charts and workflow processes. They break because we were designed to connect information in a world in which we did not have well-connected information. So what I've been thinking a lot about this concept I call organizational omniscience, which is a quote that I actually had in my very first book, What Sticks. It was a quote of a McKinsey consultant who was lamenting the fact that Nestle, you know, he said, if only Nestle knew what Nestle knows, which is it's such a big organization, such a good marketing organization, but there's these pockets of knowledge and information that aren't being shared. That was part of the motivation for building the best practice engine a decade ago, and it's still a problem today. But I think that AI is going to solve it far more than I could back in that earlier TED talk, because we don't have memory fully solved yet with AI. That the tokens that it can hold in memory are still a challenge. But there's a recent MIT paper that advanced how you can compact the information and connect it. But imagine this recording. Every meeting that you have, we already have AI note takers in all of them. Every email we send, every JIRA ticket we create, every contact or communication or document we create can be digested by AI. That really is what organizations should be aiming to do
Yeah.
today, is to make sure that they have a complete corpus of all the internal information. The challenge then becomes, okay, if you have complete organizational omniscience, then my role as a middle manager fundamentally changes, because I'm not a bridge from this meeting that I was in to this other meeting where most of the people weren't in that other meeting. So now our challenge becomes, how do we unlock new insights? And this is back to that insight worker part, which is how do we change and adopt? And so the next thing that gets broken is that not everyone in the organization wants to take that journey. At Claritas, we did a hackathon starting a year ago. And the idea was, hey, we have 18 months for everyone to be skilled up on AI. At the 9-month mark, we were only at about 38% of people who had participated in the hackathon.
Hmm.
Why? I mean, we gave people time. We did 3 different rounds of hackathons. We gave them buddies, AI coaches, and so forth. And the next conclusion was, well, maybe the hackathon is too open-ended. We need to do an AI certification program, a training program. It'll take you 6 hours to go through. We have a white belt, and then it'll take 25 hours to go through the yellow belt, and we'll have a green belt. The white belt is just basically how to use ChatGPT and use Canvas and create projects and create GPTs and know how to prompt properly. And what's interesting is only half the people 3 months later have completed that 6-hour white belt training.
Wow.
So we know that this pattern isn't unique to Claritas. In fact, Claritas is probably a little bit ahead of where other companies would be. It's been known since the book, actually goes back to the research of adoption curves and what Jeffrey Moore wrote in Crossing the Chasm, that you have these innovators and early adopters and early mainstream, which account for about maybe 20% of the population. Then you get into the late majority, or kind of you get to the next majority, then the late majority, and the laggards. The laggards and late majority are about 50% of the population. They are not going to go quietly into the night, and yet they're not going to embrace the change to be able to learn these new patterns of work. So what do you do with that? I don't know the answer to that. That's actually the big dilemma that I want to try to study. But when you ask what breaks, it isn't the technology. It's the org chart and the fact that as these new technologies come into play, people's roles fundamentally need to change. And half the people want to change. The very first 15%, they're all in it, right? They're excited about it. They see the potential. But the other ones only see risk and fear and their loss of job. And ironically, that's probably what will cause their loss of job.
I think, something I was saying early on, I would say like last year, even at Cannes, was you kind of have to determine that you are going to be part of the revolution or you're going to be revolutionized, right? You have to figure out how you fit into that. And not saying, I mean, again, the premise of this show is that there is a human in the loop and we have to figure out what's that place going to be. I think as a society, as an industry, overall, we're trying to figure out like how do we stay on top of things and how do we shift not consumer behavior, but organizational behavior, right? How do we shift that at such a rapid pace as a technology? And it's really hard to keep up. I mean, I feel like I'm falling behind every day almost, right? There's something new and it's just really hard when you're trying to keep up with the day to day, but you also want to be learning constantly. But
Yeah, I think we're into a place where we need to start embracing metacognition as a totally different way of us thinking and organizing ourselves. I wrote my first white paper for an AI audience about a year and a half ago. It was the first time I consciously sat down to write materials that I wasn't writing for another human being. I was writing for AI to consume. And I needed to do that to create the lyric case study. I needed to write a description of what made good ads. And there wasn't something that was easy off the shelf. I actually grabbed the Google document about what made good digital ads. I threw that in there, but I realized that it had missed some of the things that I knew were important from my own industry work. And so I was writing this white paper to add to a retrieval augmented generation for AI to use so it could create the storyboard that would make a good recommendation. So I think humans will still have a role, but definitely for people like you and I, where it's a very, very high level of expertise, where we know what the AI is getting wrong, and we can create new content and documents and add that to the corpus so that it will direct the AI to perform better. There'll definitely be roles for that. It will become a narrower and narrower band of people who are more and more highly compensated, and this will create more income inequality. There will also be roles for new types of functions and so forth that I think are oftentimes hard to imagine at the beginning of an innovation cycle. And I heard you say on the other show, as you were thinking about, are we going to, or, there was a comment about, are we going to go back to,
farming.
farming, exactly. And there was a great quote by Edison, I think we included in the AI Conundrum, which is, he was asked if electricity will ever become so cheap that only the very poor will still be burning candles. Do you know what his answer was?
What was it?
It was, that electricity will become so cheap that only the very rich will still be burning candles. And it inverts things that turn certain things into luxury. So I think you're actually not far off on the farming and the organic, because it will take crafts and artisans. There will be a whole renaissance of artisan culture because the value in that will be worth that extra price. And that the joke that you were making another one of the shows about, oh, well, hey, that ad was definitely created by humans.
Yeah.
And that will have some type of prestige to it.
Yes.
I think that will be true. But if you look at the candle market, or if you look at the market for horses and things like that, since we've been to the automobile, there's still a market for them, but they're now very high end and very affluent.
Yep.
So that will exist. So then the question becomes, what do the other people that were displaced do? The percentage of the people that are going to be displaced and what do they do? I think if you're part of that 50% that did the hackathon and did the AI training, are leaning in, you have a lot more options.
Yep.
Because you can begin to think about this metacognition, say, what do I need to teach the AI? How do I create systems that build on top of AI's capability to do something we weren't able to do before? In my training series, the very last thing in the yellow belt is we give the AI all the content of all the transcripts, 100,000 words worth. And we have the AI look at that information, and then you create an AI agent that goes out and says, is there anything new in the news that tells us we need to update our training?
Mm.
And if we do find something, we have a human in the loop because you want to be able to say, yes, that's good information, or no, that's not. And then there's another agent that rewrites the prompt to try to get better and better. And then it has a Heijin avatar of me, which recreates and redoes the wording and creates the new video content. That job for me will probably exist for another couple of years, but at some point, my training will shift from training humans on how to think to trying to do more to train the AI how to think better. I don't know where it's all going to go, but I think I'm hopefully pointing in a direction where I think there'll be opportunity for people.
No, that's great. And it really leads to kind of this next question. So obviously you've listened to the podcast before, and I always like to ask the guests to leave a question for the next guest. So the guest that I had on the show previously was Bob Walzak, CEO of Mac Connect. And his question was, if we fast forward exactly 1 year, February 2027, what are two or three of the biggest changes that have occurred in our industry? You know, what's going to feel dramatically different and what will surprise people? If you have you said a lot right there, but if you have a summary of what that is.
I think the first part is I think we'll be surprised at how slow certain things have gone. And that's going to be that human resistance factor and trying to figure out organizationally how we change. I think the AI first organizations will have a huge advantage because they won't have that legacy and that baggage, driving with a handbrake pulled on problem. So I think part of the surprise is probably counter to what he was thinking about because he was feeling how fast things are moving. Is that if you're in one of these legacy companies, you'll be, my God, why are we still wrestling with these issues? How is it that we haven't already done this? Because the technology will have been there for a couple of years, and yet it still won't be fully at scale. When given the opportunity will be, if your stuff's so great, why hasn't it been adopted? Because the big interesting question is not the technology, it's the adoption problem. The other thing I think that you'll see at the end of 2020, as we look, years as we're turning the page on 2027, will be the way in which AI advertising is scaling and growing, and where you see a shift in media behavior. I think people will still have the desire to be entertained with media. They'll still have the desire for live sports, but a lot of the functional information, news and information and weather and so forth, will increasingly be mediated by AI.
Yep.
And the AI will begin to learn a lot deeper about our preferences.
Yep.
We just had a meeting last week, and I was thinking about how much we had done this research with, if you had your web data, if you had data like Claritas's, third-party data on consumers, and you had AI in the mix, it blew my mind about how much faster and deeper it understood us and how much more it could anticipate our needs and desires. It was actually a little bit frightening from a privacy standpoint, maybe a lot frightening from a privacy standpoint. But that reality, I think, is coming. And I think we tried to say in the AI Conundrum how important it was to try to get ahead of that. We didn't do it as an industry. It's just very hard to organize ourselves as an industry around privacy and consumer and that balance, and having a federated data that consumers controlled. I think that we probably won't be able to get that back. So I think we will be in next year lamenting that we have yet again a handful of really big companies controlled by a few really interesting people like Elon Musk that we don't fully trust with all of our data and information.
Yeah.
And yet that's the world we live in. And the question will be, how do we begin to grapple with that and decide what the right balance of power is?
I feel like I struggle with that every day when I want to use any AI, right? It's like, how much information am I willing to share? I mean, supposedly it's, you're like, oh, you're paying for it. It's not using your learnings, but let's be real. What's really going on here, right? And so I think
it's not using your learning. It is still developing a profile about
exactly.
you. All the recent conversations, like the last 140 or something like that, are saved by default. You can change that setting in the privacy settings, but most people don't change that default. And in fact, it makes the AI work better. But it really does bring some important issues that I think we should have. I would love to see us figure out a federated data system where I own my AI's memory, you own your AI's memory, and you can allow other people to use it. You can allow Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, Altman, whoever to use it, but you can also decide to take it away at any time. And they're dependent on your sharing and your consent. And you have the ability to edit, and you probably have your own AI agent that's helping you edit that information and playing back the mirror of what they really see. I'd love to see that emerge. I'm not willing to start a business for that right now because I don't know the economic model for it,
Yes,
but I'd
exactly.
love to see that emerge.
No, I completely agree. I think the ability to sunset data, whether that's social data, whether that's, your AI data that you're inputting there, I think all of that is really important, especially as we think about this younger generation who maybe some like, Joanna Gerber has a lot of precaution, but others, perhaps other, generations have less precaution. And so, what they're willing to put out socially or, just share will change drastically over the next 10 years. Final question for you, Rex. What does being an agent of change mean to you right now, in practice and not theory? Like, how are you personally embodying that in your leadership?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's something I'm struggling with at the moment because the question is how hard do you push people to change? And how much do you sort of accept that there is a diffusion curve to who is going to adopt and who isn't going to adopt? I think being an agent of change is figuring out, the technology, of course, that's almost a given, but it's actually figuring out the human side of the adoption curve and figuring out where you can find your people. Or if you're going to try to be missionaries, recognize that you're going to get some arrows in the back.
Rex, thanks so much for being here.
Great seeing you. Thanks.